Good evening everyone and welcome to Hinchingbrooke Country Park. I'm Pete Holt, I'm the senior ranger here at Hinchingbrooke Country Park. I've worked here for 12 years now and I still find it a very magical place to come to work. I hope you enjoyed your walk through Bob's Wood this evening. I hope you kind of experienced some of what the children felt when they sort of made the magical guide here, the fantastical guide here. I'd like to thank Ruby class from Conroe Park Primary School for their imagination and the effort into making the guide. They came here in all weathers to make that guide. They came here in ice and snow, floods, and but still they came and enjoyed themselves. So it shows in the guide, I think, how sort of interested they were in the park and how interested they were in the weather and the outdoors. I'd also like to thank Ruth, Debs and Caroline for their hard work in producing the guide and the display you've seen at the back. It's completely different to all our other literature, the guide, so it's very worth a read. And compare it to our normal literature, then compare it to what the children have seen in the park, and it's two completely different things. The section that I think in the guide that I most relate to is a bit on invisible doors. I have a visible door in this park. They're not as sort of magical and mysterious as the children's ones. They're ones that lead me really from one habitat type to another. And I kind of divide this park up into about 13 bits. And I have little doors that come totally into each bit. And I'm probably the only person who knows where these doors are. If during the evening you want to know anything about the park, just ask myself or my colleague Alison at the back there, and we'll help you. Hope you enjoy the evening, and I'll pass you over to Damian.
Thanks very much, Peter. And thank you very much for having us here this evening. Thank you to everybody for coming. It is very much designed as a discussion, so I hope that through the evening you will feel happy to pipe up and talk about your experience walking here, your experience of the park, your experience of wild places, and the way that creativity can interact with nature and the wild. I'm very pleased to have the role of introducing our distinguished panel. And what I've done is I've asked them all to just say a few words. I'm going to introduce them all, and then they're just going to say a few words on kind of their own perspective, their own journey towards kind of the relationship between creativity and nature. And then it's very much kind of a free-for-all, and I hope very much a dialogue between all of us here. So I'm not going to apologise for reading, because I don't want to miss out on the things that they've all done. They've all done lots of different things, and I hope we'll provide a kind of really good kicking off point for this evening. So Deb is going to start. Deb Wilenski's an independent outdoor projects leader, early childhood educator and consultant, and she's a creative practitioner working with Cambridge Curiosity and Imagination, and was one of the artists who worked on the project that Peter described. She's inspired by the preschools of Reggio Emilia and the woodland nurseries of Europe and Scandinavia, and by projects which value children as makers of culture and meaning. Joelson is, together with fellow artist Bruce Gilchrist, London Fieldworks. They've worked together for over 10 years using field-based research, installation, moving image and architecture to find ways of rethinking place, society and culture. Through residencies and research in remote sites, their work aims to probe our relationship with the natural world and approaches ecology as a complex interworking of social, natural and technological worlds. Bridget Mackenzie is a founding director of Flow UK, a consultancy which supports arts, heritage, environmental science and education organisations. She's worked in museum and gallery education for 20 years, including being head of learning at the British Library. Her interest in culture and learning is matched by her interest in ecology and in environmental sustainability. And Robert Mcfarlane is a writer and an academic. He's the author of several books, including Mountains of the Mind, The Wild Places, The Old Ways and Holloway, and many essays and articles exploring the relationships of landscape and the imagination. He's a fellow of Emmanuel College in Cambridge, lecturing in post-World War II literature. And among other things, he wrote the foreword to the guide, which recounts the experience of Ruby class. So I'm going to hand over to Deb. And
thank you.
Yes.
I'm just going to because although we were talking about the slides, I have got a few. But they're not yet. One of the most amazing moments in the project that we experienced here in Hinchingbrooke Country Park, which was a collaborative project, and Caroline Wendling is also here tonight. I hope some of you will come and talk to her at the end. One of the most amazing moments came in our morning conversation in a space in the woods which we call the living room, where we would gather to begin the day. When Farida told us, and it was around the 5th or 6th week, with a wide sweep of her arms, "I'm going to find the big city." Now, it was amazing really for at least 3 reasons. First, because Farida, although she was full of invention and really sensitive creativity, was not a child that would easily hold centre stage or make big announcements, and yet this was one of the biggest we ever heard in the woods. Second, it was amazing because we were in the woods, in what you might quite reasonably call the opposite of a city. Yet the idea of a city waiting to be found was accepted immediately by the other children and taken up by some who said straight away that they would help Farida to find it. And third, it was amazing because the idea of a city in the woods wasn't just accepted by the children, it made sense to the adults too. Now, although I've been to the woods many times, and though I really do know that there is no city in these woods, I also knew as soon as Farida spoke that there might be a city in the woods. It made me think, not for the first time in this work, that truth and invention can sit quite equally in the way that we talk about a place, in the way that we explore a place. We had actually already found other aspects of the woods and talked about in terms of architecture. We had the living room, we found doors, there'd been a castle, so why not a city? And in fact, if a city, why not a city that in Farida's words has a hot sun and a cold sun, a hot moon and a cold moon, where there are hills made of paint, and where, brilliantly phrased, there are, of course, 110 people. So the familiar and the fantastic, real and imaginary worlds, the place in front of you and your imagination of it. When we called our book A Fantastical Guide, that's what we're trying to capture, this sense that in one world there are many worlds, and they all shift around each other. The woods to us were, and they still are, a place of great possibility. And children seem to have an acute and very powerful ability to find possibility where you don't think it exists. I have a very brief anecdote to share yesterday, from yesterday in my kitchen with my 8-year-old, who I thought I'd better test out this theory that children look for possibility everywhere. So I said to him, he'd put some tape on the sign that had rolled up onto the floor. I said to him, "Pip, I'm going to tell you a rule. Can you tell me if it's true or not true, and if there's any other possibilities?" He said, the rule is, all round things roll. It just happened. I thought, I'm going to win it here. All round things roll. Even before I got the last word out, he said, no. I said, what's the exception? He said, "Mummy, this tape in a land where there's no wind and no hills." It was amazing. This moment of 8 years of exploring and observing in minute detail. He's a brilliant observer, the real world, coupled with an abstraction from that of the laws of physics, bunged into an imaginary world in which you can remove all those forces and see what possibilities are left. Vivian Gussin-Paley, who's an amazing American kindergarten teacher, has talked about children, the way children think, especially sort of at the age of around 5 or 6. She says, as soon as a child learns language well enough, and before he is told he can't invent the world, he will explain everything. I propose that going in search of fantastical possibility, explaining the world as much by inventing as observing it, is absolutely a habit of children, as Paley suggests, who don't accept adult rules yet. But I'd go further and say it's actually a fundamental characteristic of human exploration. We've always looked for the fantastic. Amongst the real, we always will, and we always need to. And I've just got a few slides to finish with, but I won't use the words, to prove my case.
the early cartographers and the maps that they drew, which were filled with monsters in the spaces that were yet to be discovered. And it struck me that all the ways that we find of documenting the world, taxidermy being one of them, to originally present specimens of nature, gets played around with. So this is from a recent exhibition. One of the earliest documentary filmmakers, a French man, Georges Méliès, after 3 years of making documentaries, thought, aha, and made fantastic fantasy, science fiction, worlds within worlds. I'll skip to the last one. And this picture is one that I've been looking at for the last few months. I was trying to explain what is it like to be in the woods with children who are looking for a city which you both know does and doesn't exist. And this picture is about closest I get to it. It's like being in another world. You've got observation, you've got detail, you've got fantastic representation of something that really, really exists. But at the same time, you've got a recomposition of that real world. And you've got an invitation, the brilliant portal in the middle of this image. The invitation in this case to look at the world, not from our world, looking into an enemy's world, but through an enemy eyes looking out. And that the world, when you look at it that way, is completely fantastic.
Great, thanks. No, that's great, thank you. Robert.
Well, I just want to applaud, really, but yeah. I wish I could see with anemone eyes, and it's a wonderful thought. We outgrow it, I suppose, all of us, but there are ways of finding our way back in. I just want to say a few words about scale, really, which emerges out of all of this. I've been lucky enough to spend quite a lot of my life exploring wild places intellectually and actually, and for much of that time, from my mid-teens to my mid-20s, I found greatness of scale to be a substantive part of the definition of wildness. So I was drawn to mountains, I was drawn to remote islands, I loved the loneliness when I found it of open ocean. And then that began to change, and it changed, I guess, about 10 or 11 years ago now. And I began to learn how to refocus and shift my vision and discover kinds of wildness that might exist in an acre of beechwoods on the city fringe, or in a fragment of salt marsh on the Thames estuary where bottles get snagged in the samphire and you can see the Corrigan oil refinery flares when it comes to dusk, or even in 170 acres of Country Park, which has as one of its perimeters a notorious A road, famous for the amount of heavy traffic that it carries. Why did my vision change? Well, it's difficult to tell in retrospect, and causes always hard to disentangle from correlation, but three reasons suggest themselves to me as a student of myself in a non-egocentric way. One is that I fell into a friendship with a man called Roger Deakin, who some of you will know as a writer and environmentalist, who's now dead, who died far too young, and he wrote books towards the end of his life, called Blog Wildwood, which was published posthumously, and then Notes from Walnut Tree Farm, which were about the very, very local life that he lived in Suffolk. And he had a childish vision, in the best sense of that word, and he was an explorer, as I came to think of it, of the undiscovered country of the nearby. And it was incredible dealing with him. He had a very, very powerful way of looking at the world, and scale was irrelevant to it in the sense that he was astonished by greatness of scale, but he was fascinated by miniaturism as well, and indeed all sliders of the scale between those 2 points. He taught me a great deal, and I still miss him very much, and his vision has extended itself, as the vision of great writers does, through his writing after his death. It's had a ripple effect. Another cause was an engagement, a discovery of the incredible British tradition of, though other traditions exist, particularly Chinese, of the art and literature of the small scale. So there are astonishing hedge visionaries and foot philosophers of all the centuries that we possess culturally. I think back to Edward the Poet Edward Thomas, and I'm particularly fascinated by, as stirred by a patch of nettles at the bottom of his yard, as by the vistas of the downs as they open to his eyes and feet as he walked them. Nan Shepherd's Scottish writer who took the Cairngorms as her inland island, and they became a parish, a keyhole through which she could see the entire universe. Simon Palmer, the artist, a little further back, but it goes all the way back to a Celtic Christian nature poetry that was produced in these islands, that they weren't known as Britain then, of course, between the 6th and the 9th centuries, and indeed a little longer after that. So our earliest green poetry, if you like, it is astonishing in its precision of noticing, and there are beautiful little vignettes of local wildness. There's a poem I'm thinking of where a blackbird is described singing from a gorse bush in a glade near Belfast Loch 1400 years ago, and that miracle is as pristine in its poetic form there as it was in some version at the moment of its hearing. But the thing that really changed the way I see was my children, and the first of them arrived 10 years ago, and the third of them, and certainly the last of them, arrived 10 months ago. And I'm still recovering and wonder if I ever will. But in a way, one doesn't want to recover from one's children, of course. And J.G. Ballard, who the last book he wrote was Miracles of Life, which was his autobiography, and in there he just very briefly says, it's a line that goes something like, we do not bring our children up, they bring us up. My children have definitely brought me up, as all those who have children know they've been brought up in some sense by their children. To me, it's come very powerfully in the form of their engagement with landscape and with place. I hurry them along saying, you must get to this place, you must get to this viewpoint. They, of course, just want to foster on the forest floor. They want to be astonished by the beetle and collect the pine cones and the acorns. They have taught me so much. They have taught me that wildness is not a function of scale. It can certainly be miniaturized and still be astonishing. They've told me that the world flexes at its borders, is porous at its boundaries, refolds upon itself in weird Mobian origami ways. And they've told me that wonder is a unique and, I think, ever more indispensable, if that is a matter of degree, survival skill in the context of modernity. And that is what Deb's astonishing project, Deb's and Caroline's and Ruth's and everyone who's been involved in the making of this book, has opened my eyes even further to. They've listened to children. They've sought to translate childish into some language that we might half understand. It's a very untranslatable language, very private language. And I was lucky enough, the last thing I'll say, I was lucky enough I wrote about invisible doors in my foreword, and I was lucky enough to get the scrap of paper which says, I want to find a secret tree and an invisible door. And I looked, and then I thought I mustn't look, because premeditation will spoil outcome in some sense. But that was far too conscious thought as well. So, and then I found it, and my secret tree was in fact the bulrushes. And the bulrushes lead to an invisible door, which is not a door through, but a door down, because of course there were the water wells, and they're a way into the hydrological subterranean system that underwrites this incredible place. So thank you to everyone who helped me find my secret tree and invisible door.
Thank you. I was just going to give a couple of examples of perhaps the way we've engaged with wildness in practice. So just going backwards now a few years to 2002, we were involved. We decided to make this project in northeast Greenland. We were interested in experiencing 24-hour daylight and how that might impact on the human body, and also whether it was possible at all to kind of transmit that experience somehow to other people in the form of an artwork. So we went off to northeast Greenland. It wasn't, the most straightforward trip. But anyway, we arrived, and I'm not going to say too much about the experience of kind of being there, because there's not much time now, but we approached it in a very rigorous way. We sort of adopted scientific methodology and decided that we were going to use physiological equipment to document the body and use a spectroradiometer to document the light. So we came back with lots of data. My one kind of feeling when I arrived was, oh my God, this is the most barren, ugly landscape I've ever kind of arrived in. I can't believe that I'm staying here for 6 weeks. And then this idea that Robert was talking about, where suddenly over that period of the summer, all these kind of minute details kind of were erupting throughout that period. So tiny flowers, and actually there was a wealth of colour and light that described it. So it was, you know, an amazing experience. But that wasn't the job. We were taking this very sort of reductive approach, borrowing from science. And when we came back with all this data, we made a conscious effort not to discuss it in a kind of poetic fashion. We just made this artwork, which we tried to be very rigorous about. And it was a kind of virtual daylight chamber that you as a member of the public could go inside and experience. And so the kind of idea that sort of inspired that was this idea of the body as a portable laboratory that we were introduced by a Chilean biologist, philosopher and neuroscientist called Francisco Varela. And also the ethnographer Marcel Mauss, who talked about the body as our first technology. In 1934 he said the body is man's first and most natural instrument. And ideas that really sort of inspired us to try and capture somehow and whether you could actually transmit that idea through an artwork. So that was our kind of experiment. Now sort of moving to more recent work. And obviously our work has changed quite a lot, and we've not only just worked in kind of wild places but also quite urban green spaces. But more recently we went to the Brazilian Atlantic rainforest, and we were interested in focusing on more ancient practices such as augury and the idea of humans as kind of forecasters, and the sort of contemporary ideas of animals and birds as bioindicators, and so the way that they can tell us about changing environmental patterns. I can't really go into the backstory of this, but it kind of slightly happened in Greenland, where we were living alongside a whole group of Arctic terns who were quite aggressive birds. Beautiful, but quite aggressive when you're close to their nest. We went round with sort of colanders on our heads to protect us. But anyway, we're really interested in the journey that the Arctic tern makes to and from the South Pole. It travels the longest journey, I think, of all the birds, and also it experiences the most daylight of any other creature on this planet. And anyway, we went to northeast Brazil, and we were interested in trying to find potential augurs there. And so we were based in the Guapiaçu River region, very, very rural kind of place. And we talked to a lot of local people about their relationship with land. And so our potential augurs were sort of the owner of the local bus company, lots of smallholders, farmers, evangelical priests, a real kind of range of people. And eventually we met our the guy that we thought, yes, we really want to work with you and try and make a film. And he was an ex-bird hunter. So he had been a subsistence hunter for kind of many, many years. And then he had changed and become a bird guide and been taken on by this kind of local reserve who employed him to kind of show tourists through the forest. And he had developed the most extraordinary mimicry skills. And so he could, on our sort of travels through the forest with him, he could call down pretty much any bird from the forest using his voice. And he sounded just like the birds. And they would come down and they would have a dialogue with him. And it was the most incredible kind of experience to sort of witness. And he was infamous in the area for making hummingbird pie. That's how we were kind of told, you've got to meet this guy. And of course he doesn't do that anymore, and that's the kind of amazing thing that he's sort of now a protector of the forest and the wildlife, and of course there are many poachers and people, so he helps to stop all that. And we made artworks, we've made film works kind of with him, quite subtle, and exploring the songbird as kind of central to that culture, rural culture. So that's just a couple of examples.
That's great.
I've been up to.
Thank you.
Okay, wow. I feel quite cruel plowing on with what I planned to say, because I want to ask about hummingbird pie and horses on the head and cities in the woods, but we'll have to just, if you can just bear with me while I say what I want to say, before you can ask about those things. So I had planned a much longer presentation with some pictures, which you can read on my blog, which is called The Learning Planet. So what I'm just going to do is to really compress that and to talk about some of the, and I'm at the end so that I can talk about some of the bigger themes, maybe slightly more political, and to kind of zoom out a bit. So my personal vocation, I've worked for 20 odd years in heritage and arts, but increasingly my vocation is about what I'm thinking of as leading people into the green, and to show that can actually be a fantastic voyage. It doesn't have to be a difficult thing. Well, it is a challenge, but it can also be fantastic. And I do think that children can be some of our best navigators into the green, and I do think that projects like this and many others that I know of and have been involved in are brilliant at developing those skills in young people, or at least allowing them to shine and live. But I don't want to go into any of that detail, but to just talk about what I think of as a dual problem, which is really like two walls of a great chasm that's breaking apart our world. And one of those is to do with the next generation, which is that the thriving ebullience of our children is being suppressed, too much, too young. And you've probably heard of this movement, a campaign that's just been launched to support play in early years education. And then the other aspect is the environment. The ebullience of nature is being suppressed and damaged to the extent that it's gone awry in a critical way. And in a way, the two crises are one. It's one crisis. We're suppressing the wild, in effect. So in order to tackle this, I'm committed to what I'm calling Ecosphere Literacy, which to me is broader than just environmental education. It's about an ecological way of knowing. And I'm breaking it down to define a broad range of competencies, which are really, to connect with the theme of this evening, about mapping life, about making meaning from it, nurturing it, and creating it. So more than literacy is really just about reading, it's really pushing it way beyond that to be much more generative and creative. And I think there are two dimensions to these capacities. It's not just about place, it's about place and time. So you could say it's not just about geography but history. So environmental education rightly is about the skills for exploring and caring for places in ways that actually pay attention to those places. And I think you can't claim to belong to a place or to have place-related identity unless you care for it ecologically and therefore care for its other inhabitants. So there's a kind of fairly political thing to say there. You can't claim identity unless you care for that place. But I think there's a broader challenge, which is about placing ourselves in time in relation to our past generations, to the time of life of other species, and to planetary systems. So if we start to integrate learning about place and time, then I think maybe we can overcome our aphasia about Earth systems and planetary boundaries. The ecosphere is all of the dimensions of the planet. It's rock, water, air and life, and we could see it as an interoperating system of Earth. And also maybe we can have a shifted perspective that I think we often see nature as a container, something we go into, like we walk into a picture. But I want to show that it's really about becoming green-hearted. It's about becoming more connected to nature, to understand that nature is ourself. Nature is self. That we're not disconnected from nature. Actually, we are nature, but nature has gone awry. So it's a fairly kind of philosophical shift, and I think it is something that children can begin to understand and can possibly teach us. In my longer presentation and blog, you can find out more about a kind of methodology that breaks this down and looks at good quality education. And this project exemplifies that really. It's really about how learning has to be emotional, contextual and playful. And all of those things are things that I think artist educators do very well and really prove the role for creative practitioners in education. And I'm inspired by Joseph Beuys, whose mode of art was social sculpture. I've set up a project called Boisterous, which my daughter came up with. Children are brilliant at this. She said, we can be boisterous like Joseph Beuys, which is like being creative and boisterous. So, brilliant. But just a final point really, that perhaps now, Joseph Beuys died some time ago, perhaps now social sculpture needs to be reframed as planetary sculpture, not just changing the structures of society, but also actually changing the structures of our planet so that we can regenerate life, because we are in the Anthropocene age and we have to take control in a way that enables us to survive. So, big provocation there.
It's fantastic. There's kind of from the kind of minute to the massively global in 20 minutes. So well done, everybody. Thank you.